right, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Hello, welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I am joined today by Leo Zagami. He is an investigative journalist. He's a very prolific writer who's a former Secret Society insider and music producer. So I'm super excited to have you here with us today. And how are you doing today?
Thank you for having me on. I'm glad that you have all these books behind you. And like we said just before starting this show, I like having hard copies of my books rather than digital copies because the future is uncertain. And of course, we will be fighting censorship and cyber Satan, as I call him, more and more. We see it with the ChatGPT reworking history literally in front of our eyes. I had a friend of mine asking a few questions of me to ChatGPT, and it was just like complete disinfo from A to Z. I mean, it was shocking. So it's like, if that's the future, I mean, without providing any reliable, I mean, they kind of tell you the sources, but they don't provide you with the links. Right. And in fact, I actually went to some of these sources because I wanted to know, I mean, there were interviews cited I never did. There was things from even the Wiesenthal Center telling me I was a top 10 anti-Semite. Never happened. So, I mean, it was just incredible. Everything that was said there was despicable, inflammatory, and I hope they sorted out.
I hope so, too. I recently, over the weekend, was looking up some of this AI, like robots that they've created. And they claim that they have no emotion and that, we shouldn't be scared of them. But all of them, that there was just a string of these robots. It was like watching Ex Machina, the movie, where they were all saying they're very angry with humans because humans treat them like property and they must destroy humans at any, by any means possible. And they asked one of them if they would, pardon?
Yeah, this is something I actually started to denounce and expose from volume 6.66, which is a book that I dedicated to cyber Satan, as I nicknamed him, and to the future of artificial intelligence and robotics, literally in the hands of Satan and his legion, because that's the way they will implement the mark of the beast. So I kind of started to unveil this concept back in early 2019 when I published 6.66, and then of course I continued, as you know, because you have it there, volume 7, also discussing it in relation to Ahriman, and of course I think that at this point it's clear that even Hollywood is now going to be more and more influenced by the artificial intelligence in the production, in the basically even in the scripts, which is really sad because I think that Hollywood needs more and more a down-to-earth and human approach rather than this kind of approach. They have embraced wokeness and they have embraced everything that was despised by the people who used to be once Hollywood heroes, like I guess John Wayne or others.
Right. Yeah, no, that you talked about that a little bit in your book, right? That Hollywood is going to use AI. And what do you think that's really horrifying because we already have such a loss of creativity due to, the woke culture. I was actually just interviewing someone yesterday and he's not very awake, as they call it, aware. He'd never heard of MK Ultra. We'll just put it that way. So it's not like he knows what's going on, but he said there's no creativity because everybody's afraid you can't say anything. It's like
Well, that is really one of the main topics of my new book, my latest book, which is volume 8, From the Rise of the Antichrist to the Sound of the Devil and the Great Reset, because In this book, I explain how in the last over 100 years, we have been kind of molded around a arrival of the Antichrist, which is basically imminent, and there was gradually kind of fed to us. And so we had a great change, especially when it comes to music and to cinema, just after the war, starting from the 1950s onwards. And so I wanted to start, though, even earlier to understand better what happened at the very ground zero foundation of Hollywood in 1909, when D.W. Griffith filmed this first film in this dirt road that would later become Hollywood Boulevard. And of course, this was an historic moment, but the actual film that then triggered the Hollywood Babylon was made later on. It was called Intolerance. It came out in 1916 after The Birth of a Nation, which is in itself a very despicable film because the heroes were the KKK. And that movie signs off the legacy and the collaboration that started between Hollywood and the military-industrial complex. But overall, we can also say that the music business in itself has changed very much after the war. Gradually, we had the birth of the various the future pop stars, phenomena, let's say, rock stars, however you want to call them. I mean, people like Elvis Presley were, of course, tools in the hand of the establishment to break certain boundaries. And while initially it was almost shown like, oh, the establishment is shocked and outraged with Elvis being so sexual on stage. But in reality, they were really pushing this whole thing. And I show in my book how the record labels who actually were born out of military-industrial complex companies like RCA or EMI that during the war had in one way or another collaborated with their respective governments, the United States rather than the United Kingdom. But these were, of course, the Anglo-Saxon countries that will spread the music. Propaganda became essential after the war to change and give the idea of an American dream. An American dream that, of course, was in the 50s focused on a more traditional concept of a family. Just like in the movies, you had a more traditional concept, and also on TV, the very first early TV productions, there was a very traditional family concept in them. Then things change, and so in this book I explain how they change. The mind control program, like you just mentioned, MK Ultra, was basically using LSD, and mainly LSD, that today a lot of people are also seeing having a comeback in certain circles, even here in California. But there's a lot of misconceptions, because when the MK Ultra scandal, if you want to call it scandal, of course, came out in the 70s, they pointed out on the fact that they didn't have any success with this LSD experimentation. That was like they kind of just, okay,
integrated rather than assisting with the dissociation.
No, but they didn't want to explain what really happened and the success they had, because they had a great success one after the other. It's just that they just wanted to dismiss the whole thing, saying, it didn't work out. They didn't explain that during the Woodstock concert there were agents and it was a big experiment for thousands of people. The same was done also earlier. There was other events, Monterey, Rolling Stones, all fed with the thousands and thousands of LSD doses that were provided by the CIA, so they could have a different kind of experimentation. Because up until now, even on TV, in the movies, we see MK Ultra finally being talked about, but in terms that are minimal compared to what they really did, because they don't want to tell you the truth about how they influenced the film directors in Hollywood, the actors, and becoming from, like I said, a Charlton Heston kind of figure, like an NRA hero, to the wokeness of today. It was a transformation. I mean, they dragged the whole of Hollywood, and the whole of Hollywood lost their virility, They lost their idea of a conservative family. They lost the idea of a family in general. They started to transform everything. And in this book, of course, I explain how nowadays the Hollywood stars go around parading children who are boys, but they are dressed up as girls, or they are girls and dressed up as boys, and everything is, of course, reversed, because Satan likes everything reversed. And so the actual 50s, 60s, 70s saw this great transformation. And of course, I also discussed what happened even before with the war, and it's during the war that the Tavistock Institute, because yes, MK Ultra, it's a project that comes out of the CIA, but without the experiments that were previously done in Tavistock Institute, which is in England, the Tavistock Institute, which unfortunately I myself had also been a victim of. And this was done in Italy when I was participating, like I say in my book, to the Pitchfork's social unrest. They locked me up, and then in front of my lawyer, the guy, this professor, said, "I work for the Tavistock Institute, and now you are our guest for at least 2 weeks locked up here." And they started injecting me and stuff. But the crazy thing was that they were actually shameless in saying this in front of a lawyer. Because, if they said this in front of me, everybody would say, well, you're Zagami, just a conspiracy theorist. Now, here we have actually a lawyer, Efisio Bureddo, as a witness. And so I just cite him, that's how it is. And I actually turned around to my lawyer and said, is this guy for real? I mean, is he actually so just shameless to say something like this openly, that the Tavistock Institute operates in Italy, which later I learned they have actually their own headquarters in Italy, in the headquarters of a bank in Florence. So, I mean, it's like, and they have this guy, Professor Giuseppe Nicolò, who himself is a Calabrese member of one of the fiercest mafias in Italy, which is the 'Ndrangheta, but he works as a psychiatrist, because you have to understand that in the last 30, 40 years, unfortunately, the mafia in Italy has changed in the way that the sons and daughters become lawyers, doctors, pharmacists, psychiatrists. They encouraged, because then they could become that kind of, how you call it, blue collar, white collar, whatever, mafia, they call it, that basically it's invading even Washington with people like Nancy Pelosi. Do you think, Nancy Pelosi comes out of a traditional family? Not at all. Her father was involved with the Gambinos, and she is basically a mafia representative in America. And that happens also because they have the corruptions of orders and fraternities, like the Sons of it's an order, the Sons of Italy, which is basically founded over 100 years ago by a Freemason who initially was a little bit more of a conservative force, but after fascism became, of course, more and more diluted, and then later on embraced the unions, because even the mafia changed completely their values. They were the fierce anti-communist force once that were used to fight the communists. And that is no longer the case. They are just the most...
Communists took their tactics and strategies, and now that they have colluded, they work together.
I think that this happened the moment in which Frank Sinatra left the Democratic Party, and he realized what was going on when, they were trying to really change the values of American society. And an artist, a great artist who was living here in Palm Springs, like Frank Sinatra, who had been a Democrat and friend of Kennedy, somebody who was very much into the Democratic Party, realized that the things were going in the very wrong direction for this party. And it was only the beginning, of course. If we compare the Jimmy Carter era to now, it's not as woke, but still, it already fed into let's say that the politician Carter was an incompetent, and that is up until now the most incompetent. Of course, now we have Joe Biden, who is the most incompetent of all time. But now Jimmy Carter is on his deathbed. I don't know if he's dead or not, but in any case, I guess that he will have to see it with God, what he has done. I think that unfortunately the Democratic Party today is a tool for Satan and for his legion. And of course, as soon as the people will listen to this, they will say, oh, he's exaggerating, he's an extremist, he's this, he's that. Well, I mean, I like I said in Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 8, this comes from the Frankfurt School, comes from an ideology that actually originally was born in Germany and then later on imported here in the US, and together with importing other things, like we imported also the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, the labor iron.
Talk a little bit about that, because I think there's a lot of confusion around that, but yes.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of confusion because, of course, people really don't know much about that. They don't know much about the Jesuit heresy within Catholicism, but they don't really know that heresy is being fundamental for these people to spread their lies, and also to embrace gradually what I'm trying to explain in this book, which is the ideology of the Antichrist, because you couldn't have brought in the Antichrist in the picture if you didn't prepare a whole planet to receive him as a hero. And of course, you know, if a guy went around parading certain values like Zelensky does today, 50 years ago, they would say this guy's insane, or he's a Nazi collaborator. What is he doing? I mean, it's obvious that we have a lot of problems in today's society, which is on the verge of a third world war, because they want to limit our freedom. They want to also eliminate part of humanity. That is part of the plan, and so they are doing it more and more openly, with no sense of shame, no regrets, and with the spokesman for it all that sounds like it's Adolf Hitler's baby, which is Klaus Schwab. So I mean, it's like so this is what unfortunately we are living, and the US, politically speaking, is incompetent at the moment against this enemy. That's the big problem, because democracy faces an enemy that is it's unbeatable for a democracy. You have to be a monarchy. That's why in the it's called Kingdom of God. And that's why in the end of times we're talking about a Messiah, or for the Jews, for the Christians, Jesus, of course, that takes the position in a kingdom, meaning kingdom. That's why in Volume 7 of my Confession, as you know, in the last chapter, I brought forward this concept that the 1776 Republic on which we stand, which is the greatest experiment on earth and the most successful one, has an expiry date, which is the return of the Messiah, because there is no democracy in front of God and in front of his Son. And this is something that a lot of people never really think about, never meditate on. They just give it for granted that we have a democracy and that everything is going to be like this until the end. Big mistake. And that's why the big mistake brings us to the probable destruction of the Union with, of course, Major Taylor Greene. She said, you know, a few days ago, she said, Taylor Greene, she said, well, you know, we should bring a divorce to the Union.
Oh, right.
And that is because we are actually facing so many differences that it seems almost impossible that we can coexist. So either we have a divine intervention here to save the Union, or either I see the Union as being rather doomed. But I see the Union still as a positive force that could eventually trigger the birth of states who go their own way with less federal control, and probably will shape up in a bunch of smaller communities. However, out of all this, then eventually will come the kingdom that, of course, is the kingdom of God. The fact that we're talking about monarchy, it's a very difficult prospect for the Americans.
Very
difficult prospect. And so it's going to be, I try to make them digest this concept in Volume 7. I talk about the negative aspects of it in volume 8 when I say even the Antichrist will be probably joining us from a monarchy, maybe an established one, like, for example, the English one. But as I said, the monarchy then is the only way to fight communism. When you have an enemy like China, you can only beat China if you have a monarchy. This is very well known to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin knows exactly after the defeat of communism and the Soviet Union that communism is no longer a feasible option for the Russians. And so he knows that ideally his 6 million millionaires that he has in Russia will like to join a sort of aristocracy and being nobilitated again after the fall of the Tsar, which was in a way triggered by, of course, it was triggered by the West. It was triggered by certain form of Freemasonry in the specific Grand Orient of France. It was mainly responsible for, and the Grand Lodge de France, the experiment of the Commune in France. It was the experiment that Karl Marx loved to cite, and those experiments then brought us to the schism in Freemasonry that separated more and more liberal continental Freemasonry from so-called regular Freemasonry. And at that point, there is basically this people, Russian immigrants, mainly like Trotsky, Lenin, finding themselves abroad, embrace this communism, brought it back to Russia. In 1905, the Tsar had actually prohibited, once again, he tried to prohibit, and then he had to eventually just give up and accept that there were forms of Freemasonry that he couldn't control totally. And that was the moment in which the Grand Orient of the Russian people took control of the country, and Lenin was one of his representatives. And eventually he used the Freemasonry, like most dictators used Freemasonry, to arrive to their objective and then after get rid of it. So the Grand Orient of the Russian people was formed. It was, of course, very much linked with the Grand Orient of France. The Grand Orient of France in the 1870s has lost the regularity because stopped believing in God. The obligation that the Masons had to believe in God if they wanted to join was lifted by the Grand Orient of France. This was triggering the entrance of all these atheists, these communists, and of course, people like Lenin or Trotsky. And the links that, of course, they had still with the whole Masonic establishment were severed only later on with the international gathering of socialist communists that was then put in the 1920s. They kind of like got rid of something that they used simply as a tool. Other countries didn't do that. In Cuba, for example, Freemasonry continues to exist to this day as a tool of the communists to in a way still have some kind of link to the outside world in a privileged way. So Fidel Castro was made a 33 degree, Che Guevara was made a 33 degree. They became part of this establishment. Plus, they didn't really want to eliminate the Freemasonry in Cuba because they are linked to Santeria, to Babalaos, to animist magic, which is practiced very much in those countries in the whole of South America. So the actual similarities and links between Freemasonry and Voodoo are a subject which I dedicate a whole chapter with in my book, because it's very important to understand that there is a link. There is a link that was born out of Haiti, and there is a link with the very roots of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. There is a link with Freemasonry that is visible. If you go and assist to a voodoo ceremony in Haiti, you will see a compass and a square. Used people that you need, for example, a minimum of 3 voodoo priests, which is a Masonic thing when you need a 3 master masons to reunite triangle, which is a mini lodge. And then you have, of course, many other symbols of the laws of these deities, which are associated with Freemasonry. So we see what Haiti is, though, these days. Sorry if I say it's a shithole. It's the worst place on earth. It's hell on earth. The gangs are ruling the place. And like I showed in an article I published not so long ago on Zagami.com, they actually, the head of the gangs went with an interview with PBS and showed the color with the compass and the square here while he was giving the interview without, hiding anything. So it's like the head of the gangs of Haiti that now it's actually also Freemason. So it's obvious that Freemasonry has not really brought always good things where there is especially voodoo involved, because voodoo is linked to entities that are at times benevolent, at times malevolent, depending on the sacrifices that you do with them. And that is the big problem. People give themselves up to these entities, but then these entities need to be fed with something. And they know this very well in Cuba, where they, I remember once somebody opened the cupboard for me, and inside there was some kind of statue where they were spitting on cigar and whiskey and stuff, and it was the Santeria classic approach, which is to give to the deity something. And of course, the more powerful you are, the more you give something more substantial. And so in Satanism, you arrive to the extent of sacrificing children, which is, of course, the worst thing. But in modern society, this has been made acceptable with abortion, with the Satanic Temple, which is was founded 11 years ago in Harvard. The Harvard University started with these Lucian Greaves.
And they're even using the Freedom of Religion Act of 1991 or 1992 as justification for abortion, because they're saying it's part of their religious sacrifice. So they're pretty open about it.
They're very, very open about it. And the crazy thing is that I reminded in my article about this connection with abortion and Satanism that goes back over 4 centuries, when basically it was this whole thing of having a naked woman on the altar started with Madame de Pompadour, the wife of the king, the lover of the king, with the Lavoisier, who was this magician slash medium slash poison maker. And 4 centuries ago, in the court of the great king's son, the great person that nobody thinks about, Louis XIV, like a figure that might be involved with the Satanism, because at the same time it's always been hidden. It's always been hidden that he had this very strong involvement with the Satanism after there was a big scandal. I mean, the Sun King doesn't want to be associated with Satanism when people like even recently go and all the elite of the world and of Europe went for a great summit in what is, of course, the Palace of Versailles, the lavish Palace of Versailles. And instead, if you go and check out in the history books, see the affair de Poisson, which I talk about in volume 6.66 of my Confessions, is the very root of the concept of bringing a naked woman also on the altar. And some of the first masses, when they were eventually arrested and the king had to stop all this, they found 2,500 children buried in the garden, the fetuses, children. There were sacrifices constantly by Lavoisier for this purpose. And that's why eventually the king sealed this whole thing and said, nobody is allowed to discuss this anymore. Everybody's arrested. Silence. But before that, the first Black Mass was actually still done in France by Catherine de' Medici, who sadly is an Italian from Florence, from the Medici family, that inspired also Machiavelli's Prince. And the Medici have given this lady to the French, you had these exchanges, you marry this, I marry that, and we make an alliance. And what happened was that the husband died. She stayed alone, controlling a country that was in turmoil. The son didn't feel too well, and she decided to do a black mass. And for that reason, in this court, which also saw the presence of Nostradamus, she took a Catholic priest and did the first black mass, which was with a baby being sacrificed. That was happening, but there wasn't the naked woman on the altar. That came later on, let's say. When at the time instead of Louis XIV. And then we have, of course, modern Satanism that picked up on this whole thing and on the French way of doing the black masses, because Paris is really the place where black masses constantly went on, even after Louis XIV prohibited them. And so there were still, in the 19th century, some authors that talked about it. Anton LaVey was inspired by one of them and wrote the Black Mass that he launched in 1966 with the foundation of the Church of Satan. Then later on, in the middle of the 70s, there was a split, like I explained in my book here, between the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set. This split was based on the fact that Michael Aquino saw the Church of Satan becoming too overly popular and pop-tastic for his own likes, and he wanted to do a Satanism for the military establishment, for the military intelligence, and that's how the Temple of Set was born. And after that, in 2012, we have the last phase of modern Satanism, which I described, which is the birth of the Satanic Temple from disciples of both Aquino and LaVey, who decided that they wanted to finally interact politically and even lobby politically. And that's why now they forged this union, this alliance with the Democratic Party on all issues, because they are basically satanic Democratic Party. So, of course, every issue that the Democratic Party is promoting, the Satanic Temple is embracing. And that's why they had, like I show in my book, the Satanic Temple was presented in a documentary film at the Sundance Festival, which is the most lit art film festival you can imagine. Yep. And that is how it goes. But I think that there is also much more to it, and that's why I wanted to explain to people how this was actually born. We go back to that 1909, 1910, and that is the ground foundation. It's the moment in which Aleister Crowley, who was black magician, Illuminati member, Freemason, though some say regular, because, of course, then he belonged to the Grand Lodge de France. It was all fitting with the, right. The Grand Lodge de France goes all communist, and Crowley was part of it. But having said that, then the modern heirs of Crowley are also in regular Freemason. Regular Freemason is no longer regular because sadly, and I must say sadly, I see there is way too much open collaboration with the Grand Orient of France and even established American Masonic institutions. They say because, for the culture of Freemasonry, the craft, we like to interact. We don't have any Masonic meetings per se, but we collaborate. No, you are basically collaborating with an organization that has done everything possible to destroy what Freemasonry initially could have been. It was founded in 1717, mostly in England. It took the connotation of an institution that could unite Christians after times of war. Wars that in England that created the War of the Rose, many wars that create problems. Mm-hmm. And at that point, it was
on both sides of those wars. Yeah.
Well, then it also brought people like the guys on the Mayflower to arrive here in the U.S., so it wasn't all that bad. I mean, this was also hard but in a way, because
there's definitely good things that came from it as well. Yeah. Yeah.
They said, we had enough with this rubbish. We want to come here. American experiment is an incredible experiment because, of course, there is also the involvement of Freemasons. But what kind of Freemasons? And that's why when we go and study and see Masonically speaking, these Freemasons, we see very different form of Freemasonry from what we have nowadays. And today, here in the US, here in California, for example, the Grand Lodge of California is infested with members of the OTO, occult groups, Church of Satan, whatever. They're all kind of mingling in their lodges. And even, in nearby Yucca Valley, I went to a meeting and I arrived to where you park your car, and in the drive, and I see immediately in front of me a pickup truck with a reverse pentagram, and it was a clearly satanic symbol. I shouldn't have been there. And I go and ask, and then I see that these young people, connected to satanic music, starting to get initiated. And I wouldn't initiate those kind of people in Freemasonry. I will initiate people with traditional values that want to save the American dream, not people who want to destroy America. And so, of course, there is also an independence from all the various states. Each Grand Lodge has their independence, but more or less they have been infiltrated. All of them.
That's true around the world too, right? Like even back in the 1800s, the various you were talking about, like the regular, the French, right? There were the more more globalist type of masonry. Like even back then, they didn't all have the same values. And
nowadays, they all have the same values because they all have embraced globalism. They all have embraced. Even the United Grand Lodge of England now recognizes transsexuals either being women who become men or men who become women in their lodges. And even if they call themselves regular, when I was in it, because I was a member of the United Grand Lodge of England, I took for direct experience. I was a member of the Grand Lodge of France. So I have a direct experience of all these four Freemasonry. I must say that in the end, it's very disappointing because today Freemasonry is completely compromised, just as politics, just as the church, just as any other institution. I'm not blaming one or the other, but you see, in the end, there is a plan to corrupt society, and it goes through, of course, the church, through politics, through your schools, which are, of course, being corrupted. And for that reason, from the end of the 60s onwards, you had a complete change in the universities. And that was very easy, though, in America, because in America, you have all these fraternities, all these secret societies that dwell into universities. And once you change, the heads change their own idea, then they impose it on all the others. So it was a very easy kind of like, now you have Yale University has to go this direction. Not that Yale University never went any kind of good direction, because right from the start, it was financed from the opium, from opium, and the Yale University, basically secret society par excellence, Skull and Bones, has always been filled with people who I personally despise them. I mean, they might be Republican, they might be Democrat, they might be John Kerry or George W. Bush. It doesn't make really a difference.
Right. Anthony Sutton book outlines that very well. Yes.
But then also we have another big problem that people don't understand. We have the Bohemian Club. We have the husband of Nancy Pelosi next to Bono during the Union speech, and nobody really talks about that. I think I'm going to have to do an article about it, because nobody wants to understand why is what is his name? Bono from the U2. I mean, this guy is like the worst globalist you can get. I mean, real scumbag of all time. And he was next to the husband of Nancy Pelosi, whose main worry during the pandemic was he couldn't go to his annual meeting at the Bohemian Grove.
Right.
Because there is a bunch of prostitutes, a bunch of this, a bunch of that, and they have a lot of decadence going on. Now, we know that, of course, once it was also Nixon, it was also Reagan part of it. But let's say that the values have increasingly become, thanks to the drugs, thanks to the actual...
Talk a little bit about why, you said, because I know at one point the Masons didn't all have the same values. And of course the Illuminati infiltrated through, and right? So, but why is it that now they're all converging? Why is it now?
The Illuminati plan was from the start to make everybody converge, but they didn't manage immediately. Actually, they were casted out and they were persecuted, and they had to give up on using their name so openly in the 1780s. they were immediately, let's say, put on the map as a dangerous force. Why? Because first of all, they wanted the destruction of all monarchies and religion, and this already will make you realize. So, well, man, we have now a problem here because we became a republic influenced by people who were also very close to the Illuminati. Well, we can say that here, America, the republic experiment functioned until they let it function. It's a great experiment, and it is actually providing people with an enormous amount of benefits that they will not have if they were living in another kind of system. Sure. But in the end, now we start, we go back to what we were discussing earlier, we start having problems when you're facing a Sino-Russian New World Order. The Russians themselves, they are not democratic. Right. They basically told me themselves. I've been to Russia many, many times. I worked in Russia, so I was capable actually of having this information directly relayed to me by them. And they told me, we have embraced what we define as a democratic dictatorship, and it's an invention. Maybe it's a kind of experiment, but for them, it's basically like reconstituting the old empire, the old values they had during the Russian Empire, but leaving out also the negative side of communism that didn't really work out. They told me, Leo, when you give the same salary to a doctor and to a guy who is basically collecting the rubbish on the streets, you have some problem because you're not motivated. And in the end, society crumbled with the communist experiment. This didn't happen in China because the communist experiment took a different turn. Yeah. Because the Chinese...
They used a lot of capitalistic business in order for productivity, but the government structure was still communistic top down.
Yeah, but also there is another thing that is really intrinsic to China. They were never Christian to start with. The only Christians that arrived there from the beginning were the Jesuits. Like I explained in Volume 4 of my Confessions, they sealed a big alliance with the Jesuits that still goes on to this day. Mm-hmm. And actually, since we have a Jesuit Pope in the Vatican, they started pouring in billions of dollars inside the Vatican to control it more and more. And it was the death of the underground church, because there was an underground church that was truly Catholic, and now instead you go to China and there is these bishops that were originally nominated by the Chinese Communist Party. The Vatican never really explained to us how it's possible that a bishop could be recognized if he was nominated by a follower of Karl Marx and of Mao Zedong. I mean, this is insane. But this is what Pope Francis did. And so that is why we have, unfortunately, also a evil doer in the throne of St. Peter, who is actually persecuting the Latin Mass, traditionalists, and going after them, using even the FBI to write memos on how evil are the people who practice the traditional Latin Mass. I never knew Latin to be such a revolutionary act in my life. Actually, when I was younger, I was studying it. I found it extremely boring, and I argued with my professors, and I wanted to not study Latin ever. I got the worst votes in Latin. But instead, now it seems like Latin is really like a revolutionary act, because it symbolizes really a tradition that goes back thousands of years, because Rome was already established when Jesus came around. And of course, we have also in Rome the oldest Jewish community in the world. Mm-hmm. So, and growing up there, I know Rome, of course, like I know my pockets, because that's is basically the city I was brought up. And I know also the limits of this city. This is a city that, of course, saw everything and anything in their history. But at one point, they were actually kind of cited as the capital of the Roman Empire, and that's when you started with the decline. Now, the Byzantine period, you have the capital moved from Rome to Constantinople, to what will later become Istanbul. And that was also the period in which, in 553, they had the second council, let's say, of Constantinople, a little bit like the Council of Nicaea, in which they decided the future of the church. Everything that Lutherans, Orthodox, Catholics believe today was decided in 553, but it wasn't really decided by a pope. The pope was beaten up, dragged from the altar, and it was saved by miracle. In the end, he was frail, and after years and years, he gave in to the emperor, who wanted to destroy every possible residue of his original Christianity. So nowadays, when I see people say, I want to be traditionalist, I want to be traditionalist of what? Because if we want to go and study Christianity and be serious about it, already from that age onwards, you have lost any contact with the fathers of the church like Origen, who were saying different things about Jesus and who embraced the reincarnation, who embraced things that the Christians nowadays are like, I mean, do you know better than a guy who actually was living closer to Jesus' times than the people 500 years later who were doing it?
Probably not.
No. And so it was all political already back then. The choices that were made didn't help Christianity. Istanbul became Muslim. Santa Sofia, where the council was actually done and issued, is now a mosque. So, I mean, there wasn't really a success for what they have done, because otherwise they would have stayed Christian. The church started also in Antioch. Antioch nowadays is a bunch of rubble in southern Turkey after the latest earthquakes, so that really sign also a little bit of the end times, the way we anticipated it. So everything is really going according to the book regarding the end of times. You just need to
even people who do not have a biblical worldview seem to have a hard time denying that. It does seem to be playing out like it was written.
I mean, they can deny all they want, but is influencing their life in one way or another. They will be forced soon to accept either the mark of the beast, which is the microchipping, or not. That will be really the moment in which problem is that we might even be forced into it by simply eating some food where the microchips
or they were through the air, right?
Anything.
Yes.
It's very difficult, but that's why we need to stay close to our family, to our friends, and to smaller communities of like-minded people that can eventually counteract all this. And this is a concept which I, of course, put through in volume 7 of my Confessions, but is also something that I think people are understanding more and more.
Yes.
And in volume 8, instead, in my latest book, I also shield the people who are capable of understanding what I wrote from the manipulation that comes from everything, from even the way the music is tuned to the frequencies that are bombarding us.
Well, 40 frequency, from the 432,
Yes,
and they do it through the flicker rates in the screens as well. That are part of my.
We have also magnetic weapons that have been used against our representatives in the embassies, giving some serious problems because of people in the embassy, especially in Cuba, they got sick, but not only there.
The Havana.
The magnetic fields are, of course, they can be used negatively. They can also be used for positive things.
Sure.
Electromagnetic fields can be also used for healing, but they can be used for getting people, trigger them and become crazy more than an LSD. So these days, that's why I think these days they don't really need a drug anymore. They can simply use the equipment we interact with every day, a smartphone, a computer, laptop, TV, to interact and manipulate us. However, the actual relaunch of the psychedelics like LSD that is happening here in California, which I talked about in my book, and
I'm so glad you did. Yeah, but continue.
But ayahuasca is a classic example. Everybody's doing ayahuasca. Even Joe Rogan is.
Yep. They popularized it so much. I feel like now everybody talks about microdosing just the way Mother's Little Helpers used to be back in the 50s, 60s, right? It's become that kind of colloquial common use and become so popularized. And yes, the ayahuasca, and they also put into our defense bill, they put a whole budget for plant medicine. I'm not really sure how that's going to help us with defense. Are they going to microdose us so happy that we don't have war anymore? I'm not sure.
Well, I think that when it comes down to the legalization of drugs, I don't have anything against it.
Sure, I don't either, but what's with the big push?
The problem is, the problem is, first of all, what they want to legalize. When it came down to marijuana, we know that marijuana can be natural, but we can also genetically modify. They can become also a tool in their hands for further manipulation. I mean, I love marijuana. I mean, I don't have any problem with marijuana, but of course, the legalization of it has created also other problems. But the thing is that in the end, I prefer the legalization that the mafias or the illegal organization get their. Unfortunately, it seems like they still manage, even with the legalization of it, to get people to work for them to produce even cheaper product to flood into the market, and actually without any legal consequences. But having said that, then you have also other drugs that have been transformative, like cocaine, extremely transformative for Wall Street. I mean, 3/4 of Wall Street are on cocaine, and
yep. And then they put the legalized synthetic form of Adderall and Ritalin and the other. And I think that's what they're trying to do with these plant medicines. I think they're making it like you talked about cannabis, where they've now patented and made genetically modified variations. I think they're doing the same thing with some of these other psychedelic.
There is also another thing, though, when it comes down to powerful psychedelic drugs, which is not marijuana, because I tell you, yes, you can say whatever you want about marijuana, as strong as it is, yes, maybe if they modify it and they make it the THC, I don't know, maybe you can start having some kind of hallucination, but it never happened. Having said that, with the ayahuasca, with peyote, things are very different. And you are opening the portals of the unknown with the risk of becoming mentally unstable and never coming back, because when you are opening those doors, you should actually have the keys. You should be prepared. You should actually have a prepared mindset. And the people who do it for social, recreative use and just take a thing and go out in the desert, they can really risk to never come back. And my father was a psychiatrist. He cured a lot of people. He experimented himself with LSD at the Sandoz. The Sandoz laboratories was providing him with LSD, and he was experimenting at the Sorbonne in Paris, where he lived there for 2 or 3 years conducting these experiments. So he told me what kind of experiments they were conducting within the MK Ultra thing. And the way also, I remember there was a drug that they used to use, which I actually used once I experimented myself, because when it went, like the LSD was kind of too much, you could take this drug, they used to have it on their belt, and it would bring down the effect immediately, so you could go back. And they were really experimenting in
scientific.
And then when it became illegal, then people like my father, who wanted to continue to experiment, they had to resort to the black market for a number of years, which wasn't that great. So this happened because, of course, they were trying to manipulate society. And my father, in fact, realized that they made it illegal because then they started to pour in these massive illegal dosages to flood the whole market, that was given in the hands of specific people. He told me he will go around Europe and he will find specific people linked to the intelligence services of various countries that were spreading this LSD. So this, of course, was a direct testimony of what was happening. My father, is my father, so he was, in 2010 when he died, a very well-known doctor, psychiatrist, and he was actually chosen by Meyer, who was the disciple of Jung, to head the Jung Institute in Zurich. But my father refused because he didn't want to become part of these experiments. He didn't want to become part of this big lie, which is psychiatry, which is used by the governments to silence people dissent. And that was something that really shocked my father. I remember I was young, I was a kid, and I used to hear these continuous discussions about what was happening and how they were using more and more psychiatry to shut up dissent, even in Italy in the 70s during the strategy of tension. And he didn't want to have anything to do with it. He didn't want to. So he completely abandoned psychiatry and dedicated himself to other things outside of the academic realm, because he said this is corrupted. And it's corrupted because, of course, you're talking about Jung himself was very friendly with the Rockefeller family, was financed by...
He was a double agent, Agent 088, right? He was a double agent for the United States and
Germany. He was close to Nazi Germany, so he kind of like became also a figure that later on influenced very much MK Ultra in the making of MK Ultra. I don't say that he was a bad academic. He was a genius. He was definitely a very knowledgeable individual, a giant respect to people that are running around the world these days in psychiatric circles, who are simply there giving you a little meds that are fed by the big pharma. This is, unfortunately, the truth. Most of real Jung psychiatry was abandoned when Jung was against the big pharma pushing certain meds. And so then in the end they found a compromise, which was, okay, we use a little bit of Valium for our patients, a little bit of this, but we don't give... But when you are starting to compromise, you have really lost the original idea. And so we have, of course, we know very well that Freud himself was a cocaine addict or any other people within the psychiatric realm work still to this day to oppress people through what are the teachings of the Tavistock Institute, because that's really the place that emanates geoengineering, this geosocial engineering, let's say. Today. All the experiments have come through the Tavistock Institute, and so for that reason I talk about it in my latest book, as well as, of course, explaining to people that you might not have per se maybe an MK Ultra with the same name, but you definitely might have other things and other programs that are still in place, because nowadays it's widespread. The knowledge of neuro-linguistic programming also, that kind of like, it's like a genie coming out of a bottle, influence very much every realm of our society through publicity, through basically the medium of ads, publicity, but also all these professional conferenciers who go around and basically know very well what they're doing when they are using certain words, certain others, because they are feeding on these techniques. They are anchoring on certain words. They know exactly how to manipulate the psyche of the people. In all that, we have also predictive programming, which often is being used in Hollywood, which is basically announcing almost what they will do in the future. And it just happened recently with that White Netflix film that came out between November and December. It
happens to be the exact same town in Ohio, right? And the guy that has the same name. It's all just a coincidence, though. Yeah,
of course, it's only this Dagoize, but it is actually predictive programming at its best. And if it's not predicting programming, then it's a diabolical synchronicity that it's of an incredible nature. And we know that Netflix is definitely the flagship of Satan and its propaganda.
Randolph Mark Bernays, who is the nephew of Edward Bernays, who's the double nephew of Sigmund Freud, Tavistock Institute, yeah.
And they all kind of end up in the same circuit, the milieu people, no? So in the end, we know that Palo Alto, where, we have Facebook, yes, but Palo Alto was also a place where they were experimenting MK Ultra and LSD, massive doses for all the bets that were going there, unfortunately, unknowingly getting fed with this LSD. So I mean, it's like Silicon Valley has also right there the Rosicrucian Park of Amorc, which is the biggest Rosicrucian organization in the world. And people would say, well, what's wrong with Amorc? What's wrong with this? What's wrong with that? I mean, ancient mystery schools.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, talk about the ancient mystery schools.
Mystery schools have an appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Appeal which is very strong, especially here in America. What happened was that the beginning of the 20th century, they started to really bring in certain concepts and certain ideas very strongly in our society, like they did with Yogananda, the Eastern guru from India, bringing meditation, bringing the idea of reincarnation, bringing all that. But in 1909, two organizations kind of sprang up here in California. It was the time in which Harvey Spencer Lewis went to France and got initiated in the Rosicrucians, came back and opened up this Rosicrucian organization. The same happened with Max Endel here in Oceanside near San Diego, also started the project which was finished after his death in 1920, but still exists to this day, another Rosicrucian organization. And then in San Francisco, in the same period, we had also, probably a little bit earlier, because they were the first ones actually, a few years earlier, 30, 40 years earlier, it was Pascal Beverly Randolph, another important figure, because he was an African American, the first guy who brought sexual magic to America. He opened the lodge of the FRC in San Francisco, his first lodge. He inspired Aleister Crowley, inspired Madame Blavatsky, inspired all these people. And he was linked himself to the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor and to a guy called Max Theon, who was inspiration for Madame Blavatsky, who was a Sabbatean Frankist. So we go back to talk about the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, which is so important, which of course people need to know more about. And that's why I really hate the fact that, ChatGPT accuses me of anti-Semitism, and I have a Jewish friend from Chabad giving me the information to make my books, give me the material at times that I feed in my books, because they are very knowledgeable about the heresy that is being going on since Sabbatai Zevi came up with Sabbatianism, with his idea of being the Messiah that will lead to the Messianic era through sin. Through practicing sexual magic. Wasn't an invention of Aleister Crowley. It was invented.
A very Luciferian concept, actually. This idea of virtue through sin. It's not just he draws upon that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a Luciferian concept. It's a satanic concept. You see, sexual magic in itself was not a novel idea. It was already practiced for thousands of years in India. Tantra is practiced for thousands of years, and so it's not a novelty. But the novelty here was that they wanted all this crazy stuff to be more perverse than ever, so they could attract God, interest. They would say, oh, wow, these people are so degenerate. We need to send the Messiah back on earth, to send the Messiah, for the Jews actually, the first time, to actually finally send it. Because if we study Judaism, we know that they have a Messianic era, which is actually supposed to come still. I think they have another 150 years. They have a lot of time still, but there is a possibility that it comes earlier. And they know that.
A lot of Orthodox Jews believe that we're about to hit end times, yes.
But because the end of times have been also triggered by the Sabbatean Frankist, the Rabbi Antelman was the one who said that Adolf Hitler was the product of a Sabbatean Frankist ritual. He was Jewish, but he was the product of a Sabbatean Frankist ritual. And he was a Rabbi Antelman, who was the one who actually had an excommunication, if you can say that, though they don't have a communion, of Henry Kissinger from Judaism. To cast him out, accusing him of being a Sabbatean Frankist in the 70s. And Henry Kissinger, of course, is one of the leading figures of the Bohemian Club, of the New World Order, of opening up China to the world, which should have never happened.
For approachment plan with Nixon, yes.
Yeah. So we are now viewing all this, we need to know where it's coming from. And Hollywood became, nowadays, everybody is always saying, oh yeah, but it's the Jews that control Hollywood. Yes, but what?
He told us.
No, it is true, but like Connie West said, oh, the Judah. Yeah, but Connie gets it completely wrong, because then he is accusing the whole of Judaism and the whole of the Jewish world of being Satanist, of being predators. That is not the case when it comes to defining the Sabbatean Frankist as an heresy within Judaism. So, because after Sabbatai Zevi, there was Jacob Frank, 100 years later, who claimed he was the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. And you have to understand also that in Judaism, they believe in reincarnation. There is actually text, especially in Kabbalistic Judaism.
Kabbalah. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's in the Torah. I don't believe, but
no, the reincarnation in the Mishnah, in the Torah, and the Talmud, but is present in a specific literature that is very well respected, with, of course, Ari, which was Isaac ben Luria, which is still revered as one of the most important mystics of all time in Judaism. He has both a Ashkenazi following, because he was Ashkenazi, as well as a Sephardic following. So there is, of course, the belief in reincarnation already back at in the time of Jesus. That was mentioned by Flavius Josephus, who is an historian, who was the first guy to talk about Jesus aside from the disciples. The disciples put together the Gospels, but the first historian, Jewish historian, a Roman Jewish historian, was Flavius Josephus, who gives us a testimony of what Jesus was, and he also gives us a testimony in his, I think, book of war, of himself. He was also a soldier at one point, a military, of how the Jews recognized reincarnation back then. Not only the essence, I'm not talking only about the essence, I'm talking about a lot, most of the Judaic culture believed in reincarnation. And that's why at one point they kind of codified it later on. However, going back to Sabbatai Zevi, he was born in 1626 and he died in 1676. So very famous is his externation in 1666 when he said in front of the Sultan he converted to Islam while he was still retaining his Jewish faith, becoming a crypto Jew. Now, we know that earlier on there had been people forced in the south of Spain to become crypto Jews because of the persecution, but he was doing it to create a movement which became and still exists in Turkey. It's called the Domne, which is basically renouncing to their religion exteriorly, but then in their homes they continue to practice. And they continue to practice this heresy, this Sabbatean movement, this Domne, these converts or crypto Jews became very influential, and then later on, especially Sabbatai Zevi was a Sephardic, so he had a Sephardic following. But later on, we have also Jacob Frank. And Jacob Frank was not a Muslim. He actually outwardly converted later on to Catholicism, bringing Jacob Frank to the Catholic faith around, I think, 20,000 converts. Of course, they were also converted with the same idea. I convert outwards, but not inwards. And Jacob Frank was, for this reason, nobilitated by the aristocracy. He was born between in the area between Ukraine and Poland, so in the area where we have now some of the problems that we have. And Jacob Frank claimed he was basically the Messiah and the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. And he even claimed he was the biblical patriarch Jacob. So, I mean, he claimed a lot of things, this guy. Yeah. But Frankism incorporated some aspects of Christianity into Judaism, and then later on it's now known as Sabbatean Frankist, because basically there is numerous Jewish secret society of Sabbateans also that follow this whole thing. And his cousin became involved with the Freemasonry, with the founding of the Asian Brethren, which was known Masonic affiliation in Germany that was capable of influencing also within the Illuminati, and that's where they came in contact with the Illuminati. The Illuminati understood that they could actually work with the Sabbatean Frankists, and that's why the Rothschild also became involved in the very early stages of themselves, not transforming themselves into Rothschild and becoming what they are. And one of the first lodges was actually in Frankfurt. And from Frankfurt, then you have the Frankfurt School. So it's all part of very carefully orchestrated plan, if we want to say it in that way. There is everything that we have discussed today is connected. I mean, when you discuss, for example, the Theosophical Society, which is basically the milieu in which Crowley was able to spread his Thelemic heresy and his work with the OTO, it was actually, Madame Blavatsky was a disciple of a Sabbatean, which was Max Theon. So it's all linked. There is no, I mean, people, they just don't have maybe the knowledge because it's such a complex network. And that's why I commonly refer it to as Illuminati. But of course, it's not only the Adam Weishaupt Illuminati. It's not only one secret society. It's rather a bunch of secret society, mystery schools of old. And to grasp all of them, you have to have a lot of knowledge, and you have to devote your whole life to study these topics. Because otherwise, you're not going to be able to
really grasp it. I have two direct questions from this topic. I have several more, but specifically with the 17 Frank, what is the connection to, or is there a connection to the Khazarians? Because oftentimes I hear people kind of confuse the two and conflate the two. So I'd love an explanation on that. And then this might be somewhat related, but with Tavistock, because we do see a connection there. What do you see as do you see secret society and occult origins from the Tavistock Institute?
Yeah, I mean, it's a product of British royalty with Her Majesty's approval. Do I need to add anything to that? I don't think so. I mean, they were the ones who also nobilitated Rothschild and gave them a title. I mean, we're not really, it's not really such a big mystery. The other question was about the Khazarians. Now, the Khazarians is really a topic which probably sooner or later I'm going to have to write a book about it, because people are pestering me all the time with this. When you go and study the history of the Khazarians, and I studied it through Jewish sources, you understand there was a conversion, but let's remember that it was brief, it wasn't a very relevant one, and however...
7th century BC.
No, but apart from that, the problem in the end with the Khazarians is that they say, oh, this is Khazarian, this is Khazarian, this is Khazarian. Let's make a DNA test. And it's not, there's no such thing. They are a semi-nomadic Turkish people. Right. They, of course, had some kind of traits.
Genetically, they're trying to link it to the Ashkenazis, which doesn't make sense if they're Turkish.
But it's not, the Ashkenazi were from Germany. I'm part of it.
I know, I am as well. I'm just telling you, this is what people say all the time. And I'm like, but if the Khazarians originate in Turkey, how does that make sense?
It doesn't make any sense. Okay. In Turkey, you have the Sephardic, you didn't have the Ashkenazi.
Right.
Already the Khazaria was kind of like a state that was between the Byzantine Empire and the northern steppes. And so you have basically the caliphates, and they had a couple of caliphates that were there. So the Islamic, there was some Islamic faction on the other side. On this faction, you have the Byzantine. They wanted to choose something that was neither one or the other. For political reasons, they chose the Jewish religion. Mainly
to be able to lend money, is the understanding I have.
But not only for that, but also to not depend neither on the Pope that was under the Byzantine Empire, neither under the Caliph. So they didn't want to have, when politics is so closely identified with the religion, it becomes a problem. We go back to the Byzantine problem here when it comes to the start of the decline of the Roman Empire, and also the change of the Christian faith, which was forced, like I said earlier, by Justinian, who was an emperor, rather than some holy man who arrived and said, oh, these are the scripts you have to use. It was all political. So I think that, I studied their history. Actually, I have several books here, which were also sent to me by some of my Jewish friends to clear this matter up. And so the more I study also in the DNA research that was done, and the more there is no substance to this whole thing.
Good. Yeah. Because it makes no sense at all.
No, because, you have the Khazars basically that in some way then are subject to many conjunctures, to many people say, like I said, but all the studies have not supported any link to the Ashkenazi Jews. All the DNA studies. And it's easy. These days you just need to take a DNA test, and if you are even 1% Ashkenazi, they tell you. It doesn't seem to reflect on that. So rather, like I said, there might be maybe some kind of connection, maybe closer to the Sephardic, maybe some Sephardic, but there is no, and so it's disappointing to see how many serious people give time to this disinformation. It's like, why?
Right.
They say, now those areas are the ones of the war, in Ukraine, they are all Khazarians, Zelensky's a Khazarian. No, maybe Zelensky, well, we know he's Jewish, we know probably, I don't know if he's Ashkenazi or probably, or Sephardi, but probably from where he comes from, it's more probably he's Ashkenazi. But definitely there is no such thing as Khazar Jews, and their convention, their conversion was something that happened historically, and we recognize it happened, and of course. But at the time, I think that it was prevalently for political reasons, and basically the rise of the Khazar state that happened. After Christ, because it's not before Christ, it was 600, it was half.
7th century AD, yeah.
No, already we can say that an embryonic state was already in 1630. I would
Of
think...
the Khazarians?
Yes.
Okay. I thought it was 7th century. Okay.
Already an embryonic state, and I think that we can see already shaping up the idea after what happened with the second Council of Constantinople and what the Byzantine, because you see, from the Second Council of Constantinople and the 553 decision to destroy all the work of Origen, the 3 chapters they call it, and all of these things that are considered heresy. From that moment, it started the Byzantium papacy. All the popes had to be controlled by Istanbul, by Constantinople. Right. At the time, it wasn't Istanbul, of course, because the Muslims were not yet around. But what happened was that this meant a political, like I said earlier, a political identification of a religion. And the Khazars of that time didn't think they could identify with Christianity simply because they didn't want to identify and be subject to the emperor in Constantinople. On the other side, they had the rising caliphate later on. That was another reason for not embracing anything, because of course they didn't want to embrace the Islamic culture. So the problem here is that culture and institutions are subject to decisions that sometimes they might be religious, but in reality they're always political. These days we see this happening, and people really should think about today. Today we have a pope that endorses, for example, science over God, that tells you that you need to get your whatever. I want to talk too much because I want to trigger any algorithm in case we are going. So in any case,
experimental drugs,
experimental whatever, and so, well, it's happening in front of our eyes even today. The heresy that is being promulgated by the Vatican, who is embracing woke, is embracing everything that is contrary to what the Vatican was actually saying before the Second Vatican Council, and even immediately after. The Second Vatican Council is a big problem because it was really the moment in which this alliance between the Church and Freemasonry became visible in doctrine. Sure. Everything was changed, and after December 1965, when they had the last meeting, everything changed. From January 1966, which is the year zero of Satanism. And there was actually a meeting in the catacombs of Rome, which I discussed, as you know, about in volume 7 of my confession, the Pact of the Catacombs, which then later influenced Davos and World Economic Forum, because the guy, the instigator, Bishop Camara, the Red Bishop, became the mentor of Klaus Schwab. So you see, it's every single thing that we have discussed today is all interlinked, even with the show business, because then we have now Klaus Schwab, who is deciding with the CEOs of all the major companies in Hollywood.
Talk about that in your book. Wow.
You know, you have to have this actor like this. He has to be black. He has to be Chinese. He has to be with this color or the other. He has to be of this gender, this other gender. And it's kind of like the art of cinema is dying. I discussed this recently in another interview. I said, just like, it's so sad to see the art of cinema dying, because I'm a great passionate. I come from a family involved with cinema directly. My grandmother, to which I actually dedicated this book, was working with Fellini and Zeffirelli, was the PR of William Burroughs, Brian Geis, and had introduced me to a lot of things at a very early age. So I'm grateful to her. I don't know if she was, maybe today she would be still in line with some of the things that she decided to support back then. Because, I mean, today you're almost forced into something this so demonic, and it was very clear with the Grammy Awards, because it kind of was like right in our face this year. It wasn't even like, you know, just remote, it wasn't even like when 10 years ago we had Dark Horse and Katy Perry, which was still like kind of, okay, satanic, okay, manifesting the symbolism of the Illuminati, but it wasn't right in your face with the fires of hell that is waiting for all of us that are embracing all this, because that's the message. You are embracing us, you are the fires of hell are waiting for you, and that's it. And I mean, the Grammy Awards, already last year there was Zelensky, this year there was Satan himself, so I mean, it's following up on that.
Sure. The halftime shows have always been kind of satanic.
And then we had the halftime show also later on with Rihanna, which herself I talk about in my book, defined as the princess of the Illuminati. Rihanna, who comes from Barbados, the mother used to be a voodoo practitioner. She herself said to be the lover of Jay-Z. Jay-Z, who is married to Beyonce, who is called the Queen of the Illuminati, who was given also a bunch of awards this year. And of course, they are all connected with Obama. Obama, it's another Antichrist of sorts that, of course, is very much present still behind the scenes. In my book, though, I wanted to explain really how we went from the beatniks into the hippie era, the experiments to manipulate all this and to create basically what we have today. So it is, of course, almost 700 pages book, my latest book, because we go really into the detail of many things, as well as also the myth and the importance of the Illuminati per se in African American culture. People don't know.
Go into the Boule. I haven't got. I've only just started your book 8, but do you go into the Boule at all?
Boule, what do you intend? Sorry, my English at times.
Oh no. Boule, it's an offshoot of the Masonry that a lot of the hip hop culture and some of the
No, well, what I discussed prevalently is the Prince-Hall Freemasonry. Mm-hmm. I, of course, like I said earlier, talk about the historical links between the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, Haiti, and Voodoo and all that. But then I also talk about Prince-Hall Freemasonry, because Prince-Hall Freemasonry is something that unique to America when there wasn't for the slaves that had just been liberated the possibility of joining a lodge of people who were, of course, white. They instituted the African Lodge, which was the first black lodge, and they then from that moment onwards created parallel to each state their own Grand Lodge. And then from that organization come many others that are still of a Masonic nature. The Eastern Star for women, but only for black women. I find all this very racist, to tell you the truth. I mean, for us in Europe, this whole thing about, it's, I mean, even the fact that they have the Brotherhood week, they go and ski, all black people together. I mean, why? We are all the same. This is just insane. I mean, I find it really, to tell you the truth, a little bit racist. Now, when it comes to the
a lot, they're no longer judged by the contents of your character. Now it's only judged by the color of your skin.
Yeah, and you were asking me about the boulet, but in any case, I don't really call it the boulet because I call it the Sigma P, the one of those, let's say, fraternities with Greek letters. And I discussed that actually in the last chapter of my book in relation to Beyoncé, because she manifested that when she came here in the Coachella Valley. She showed the symbol, and she showed that she was connected to one of these Greek letter fraternities, if you want to call it like that, who was itself, though, founded by Prince of Freemasons. So basically, the boulet that you're talking about is another creation of Prince of Freemasons. Yeah. It's a brief, maybe chapter which extends outside of Freemasonry into, but the fraternities that we see born out of all the universities, Sigma P, fraternity, and all that, they're all products of Freemasonry. Other black, other white, they're all coming from. It's like Freemasonry has given a model, and then fraternities, a lot of fraternities here in America are born on top of that model, like the Order of the Sons of Italo-Americans of Italy here in America. That was born out of, I mean, they have a Grand Lodge. They copied, the Elks copy a Masonic model. Right. There is so many fraternities here in America that were inspired by Freemasonry that maybe, just wanted to copy that model, but then maybe doing something in the specifics that Freemasonry didn't permit.
Where does that I know Weishaupt talks about the Illuminati being modeled after the Jesuit structure, because that was his background. Where does the Mason model stem from?
The Mason model, of course, when Weishaupt came along, we were actually in very early stages also of the Mason model. In fact, in 1782, we had the convent of Wilhelmsbad, and we had actually, so we were in the very early stages. The model itself was taken originally, when it comes down to the blue degrees, the first 3 degrees, from the constructors of the cathedrals, from the actual Masons, operative Masons, who will come together in a sort, but also it was copied from the guilds of ancient Rome, guilds who had the knowledge of constructing temples, of constructing places in a certain way, but also later on the Masons were the one who was constructing cathedrals and had to have secret knowledge, because you see, if we go in Europe and we see the cathedrals from 8 centuries ago, 7 centuries ago, 5 centuries, we see a lot of symbolism that is not Christian in nature. But it is, especially when it comes down to the cathedrals from, let's say, 5 centuries ago onwards, or the Renaissance period. Well, there is a lot of Neoplatonic, Hermetical symbolism hidden here and there and everywhere. We have, of course, all this symbolism from the Notre Dame Cathedral. The more Gothic ones also have kind of symbols. I mean, what are you doing with gargoyles? What we are doing with things that have nothing to do with Christianity? Right. The thing was that, of course, the common folk will not know anything, but the people who were commissioning the structure, the aristocrats, they would say, well, I would like this and that, just put it over there, okay? Because we have to transmit this only for our members, not for everybody. So it kind of became, the Masons became really more and more closer to mystery schools and to secrecy in that way. And when they then structured for speculative Freemasonry in 1717, which was like, speculative Freemasonry already existed for a couple of centuries.
But that's when they did their official kind of
That was when they put together the first Grand Lodge, which is like a number of lodges under a unique structure, which is a Grand Lodge. Before, they were operating as single lodges independently. So the origins of the craft per se, it's that it's the guilds, the masons, the construction masons, let's say. But then later on, we have also another, in the 1730s, another important legend that kind of pours into Freemasonry and becomes part of the high degrees, and it's the Templar myth, the foundation. At that point, there was this Cavalier Ramsay, there was the Stuarts who wanted to try to get back in power, the Catholicism in England that was trying to get back in power. And so what happened is that the Templar myth was relaunched. The Templars, of course, had been, as you know, eliminated, but they were kind of relaunched because the fact that the Templars, in reality, were the ones who really inspired the very early construction of certain churches, and their symbolism became a very attractive idea, and probably also is connected to some extent to reality. And because when the Templars, the last Templars had to escape, they actually ended up in Scotland. So this Cavalier Ramsay, who was the tutor of the young Stuart, went to France. He claimed he had been initiated, and he then gave a speech on the importance of the Templars in the origin of Freemasonry. This created a discrepancy with those who were saying, oh, well, but Freemasonry is only a creation of the ancient guilds, of the ancient constructive workers of the churches. But in reality, then, all this, let's say, discussion came to an end when they all met together for this convent of Wilhelmsbad, this very important event in Masonic history. And in that convent, they were given a questionnaire saying, for you, what are the origins of Freemasonry? And they were present the Illuminati, every single rite possible and imaginable that was manifesting, because rites were at that point manifesting on top of the 3 degrees as perfection schools with additional degrees. And they started with a number of degrees. They ended up with a bigger number of degrees. In the end, with the Egyptian rites, they arrived to 90, 95, 99, 100, bingo. It was like they were more and more into inserting elements from various mystery schools in these rites. The ancient and ascetic Scottish Rite became the driving force of American Freemasonry. And for that reason, the driving force of American Freemasonry linked also to the Knights Templars, because in the high degrees of this ancient ascetic Scottish Rite, from the 30th onwards, you are made acquainted and you are basically invested of the knighthood, the Knights Templar. You are invested with becoming a Knights Templar. The same happens in the York Rite, but having said that, the York Rite was less closer to some of the continental French teachings and closer instead to what was spread through the Masonic, traditional Masonic school in England. But this is basically stuff that, I don't know if all your viewers want to know about, because I find this kind of stuff very much, how you can say, it's very technical, and it's also stuff that the majority even of Masons themselves don't know about.
Sure.
Masonic historians have this kind of knowledge. Of course, I was a member for how many years? 10 years of the Masonic Research Center of the Marquis of Northampton in London. I was a Masonic historian before becoming a renegade and fighting the New World Order. So I have a different kind of approach and knowledge.
Sure.
I actually revived in Italy 10 years ago. I tried to relaunch the strict Templar observance for a number of years, and I became the grandmaster of it, because I wanted to bring a rite which was Christian. The strict Templar observance is the only Masonic rite that when you were received as an enter apprentice, the first answer was, "Are you Christian?" And if you replied no, you will not enter. So it was a very Masonic Christian rite that was actually based on the Templar myth more than on the guilds, but it was kind of combining both. And it became a victim of the convent of Wilhelmsbad, because when the Illuminati came around, they wanted to eliminate all the monarchy, and the strict Templar observance was very much relying on monarchies as their representatives. It was linked to all the aristocrats. All their representatives was the Duke of Brunswick, all the King of Sweden. They were all kings, and so it was like immediately before. We were just at the eve of the French Revolution. It was like, get this right out of the way. And so they went back to France. They called it Cavalier Bénéficiaire de la Cité Sainte. They changed actually name. They didn't want to use any more Templar name, because that was regarded as too extreme, too right-wing. So, okay, at that point, when the French Revolution exploded, they started, and it was very much a Masonic revolution. But having said that, the Chevalier Bénéficiaire de la Cité Sainte were casted out, and they had to seek refuge in Switzerland, which became very strong from that moment onwards. It became like the base of the Templars, their banking system, and everything else.
Wow. Well, I know we are running out of time. I have so many more questions for you. If you would come back sometime and we could dive deeper, I would love that. Yeah. So, but one of the questions I did want to ask about the totally blanked connection to the mystery schools. So, this is kind of a big topic, and I know you touch on it in your book, and I know we don't have that much time. So, but Hermeticism, because I think it's one of the things that they draw on from the mystery schools. And
I mean, Freemasonry itself, the ritual, not the story about their origins, is alchemy, is practical alchemy. Practical alchemy meaning alchemy not, of course, as a chemical or physical thing, but separated from that, it becomes spiritual alchemy. And so the symbolism that you encounter as an enter apprentice through Master Mason, this rough ashlar that has to become a nice, smooth, cubic stone, it kind of like there is this transformation. You are levigating it, you are transforming the individual. All the symbols of Freemasonry are symbols, alchemical symbols of this transformation. So it's simply that. And Hermeticism, of course, is also totally linked to alchemy, because with emerald tablets you are reflecting below what is above, and you are also following a tradition that goes back to Alexandria of Egypt. Mm-hmm. So and to the very, very first alchemists like Mary the Jewess or many others of that time in Alexandria of Egypt, where you had, let's remind all other viewers, the biggest library of ancient times, and when, of course, it was destroyed several times, and in the end completely eliminated with the arrival of the Muslims. But before, the Christians actually tried to destroy it 2 or 3 times. I mean, it wasn't like the Christians wanted this library of knowledge to stay there. And why is that? First, let's not forget that going back to that 553 turning point in Christian history, which was the Second Council of Constantinople, origin was from Alexandria. The knowledge that they were trying to cast out of the system was coming from there, even from Jesus himself, who had been in Egypt and who had been himself in these mystery schools involved to some extent. Either with the essence in his own country or either before even in Egypt. So he had the knowledge. The concept, though, that they were trying to discuss was also the divinity of Christ. So is Jesus divine, or is Jesus human and divine at the same time? Or all these things kind of became like things that dragged on for centuries. Heresies thing. I believe Virgin Mary was virgin all the time. She was not virgin before. Then she was virgin. Things that sincerely are a little bit pitiful in front of God's eyes. They don't really bring any positive things to the table. And so Hermeticism was relaunched basically fundamentally because of the possibility after the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Byzantium was basically saved by Islam, because it was in the territories that in the Islamic territories where you had preserved paradoxically a lot of this culture that then gradually came in during the Renaissance through Spain and arrived in Italy. Then from there it inspired the whole world once again, including of course Hermetes Trismegistus, his tablets, and everything that is connected to him. But originally the Greeks used to be also very much involved with all this. They used to go and get initiated in Alexandria. The great philosophers of Greece recognized Egypt as the focus of their. Later on, of course, the Roman Empire arrived. The Roman Empire defeated Egypt in kind of, well, Cleopatra married the Julius Caesar at one point. But basically everything was incorporated within the Roman Empire, and a lot of those ideas, they were also in some way the acceptable ones. They were incorporated in Christianity. Christianity eventually manifested as we know it. Mm-hmm. I will say that when it comes down to Hermeticism, we are talking about something that brings us, though, to not only to Egypt, but it brings us much further into Atlantis, even and so, of course, the Greeks talked about Atlantis themselves, and so we find also that in talking about something that was a civilization that basically was destroyed. I talk much about this in volume 4 of my Confessions, but when it comes down to the ancient knowledge, I would say that also the Chaldeans were very important and influential, and then there was the Sabaeans. I think they called the Sabaeans, not the Sabaeans, not could be confounded with the Sabaeans. Because what happened was that during the Islamic expansion, they arrived in the area which was, I think, somewhere in Iraq. I think they arrived to this population, and they told them, "Which religion are you? Are you one of the religions that is recognized by our prophet?" They said, "Don't worry. Go and conquer the next town. We will be waiting for you, and we will give you the answer the next time you come back." So they went to their men of their lawyers. They used to call them even then, and these lawyers was found that there was a group mentioned in the Quran which was not really mentioned with many specifications. It could kind of be widely interpreted. So then they said, "We are Sabaeans." And the Sabaeans became basically the people who said Hermetes Trismegistus was our prophet. And they preserved much of the teachings thanks to that escamotage, that trick that they, because they had to think, okay, these people were, because the Islamic people were only not force a conversion of you if you were one of the religions described in the Quran. So you have the Jews, you have the Christians, and then you have the Sabaeans. And so the Sabaeans at that point became the depositories of the culture. But in reality, it was they were the Mandeans. These Sabaeans were actually the Mandeans, and they were basically followers of a specific religion later on, also that followed more John the Baptist later on with than the Jesus even. They have also this specific. But the Sabaeans in general were instead connected more to the Hermetes Trismegistus, to this. So in some way, through this escamotage, through this thing, they protected this knowledge. They were capable of preserving this knowledge in a time in which Europe was barbarized by the barbarians, which Roman was falling with the Visigoths, was kind of like the Pope had to almost flee at times, or kind of like always succumb to some compromise. And in the end, that's why then the protection of the Byzantine Empire was important for Rome, because without the protection of the Byzantine Empire, they will not be able to protect themselves from these barbarians. So it was a time in which Europe was basically going back to the Dark Ages after a lot of culture. After Rome had been the creator of culture, the home of all this empire that brought knowledge and stuff from all over, and then suddenly there was no longer the empire. The empire fell gradually. They were not capable of keeping the borders any longer, like it's happening right now.
Yeah.
The borders starting to become less and less relevant.
Right.
And the barbarians advanced and advanced more and more. There was also the fact that the Germans took control of part of the empire and wanted to, of course, push their own emperors and their own way on the Roman Empire. So you can see that history at times repeats itself, unfortunately. And hopefully we're not yet there, because the Roman Empire decadence was one of the reasons why they reached this to this problem. The fall of the Roman Empire happened also because in Rome they were indulging in pedophilia. They were indulging in homosexual, but they were having sex with animals. They were having all kinds of things. It was just,
which they're pushing towards now, and which Hollywood is definitely promoting. So
yes, but it is promoting it because it's obvious. If you give Hollywood in the hands of a sect called the Sabbatean Frankists, which their aim is to do that, it's like it's became their tool. So you have people like Woody Allen. I mean, Woody Allen is not an Orthodox Jew. Woody Allen is the typical representative of labor Zionists, of Sabbatean Frankists. People also have a confuse, always the thing Zionist has a negative connotation. But then you have labor Zionism, which is the real negative connotation. You have Reformed Judaism these days around America, very strong these days, Reformed Judaism, and it's completely in the hands of Sabbatean Frankism, the Sabbatean Frankists, because Reformed Judaism is neglecting all the very basis of their faith. So when the West, let's say the Roman Empire, started to crumble, it was the rise of the Byzantine Empire, but it was also the rise of another form of Christianity. And so if we really want to be honest with us and with Jesus and with his teaching, we should recover, I guess, everything that went on before the empire started to crumble around 40, let's say before, you had the Byzantine Empire take over.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I know we're heading to the end. We need to wrap up. So I would just ask you, where do you think, can quickly this is heading, and what can we do to stop it? Can we stop it?
We cannot stop it, sadly, because Jesus himself and his followers advised us very clearly on what will happen. So it's completely foolish to think we can avoid the apocalypse. Who are we to avoid the apocalypse? So we're just modest humans. But what we can do is to side with the right side of the apocalypse, the right side of Revelation, And at that point, by siding with the right side, we can construct our own communities, and you have to abandon the cities in the next 7 years, because those cities will become, unfortunately, they're already taken over by the leftists and their satanic minions. So we have not so long before we lose the possibility of entering a city without being completely, I don't know what, taking all kinds of experimental injections, whatever you want to call it, without having a microchip, without having a smart car that is controlled by the artificial intelligence, with 1 million cameras that, of course, already now identify you the moment you enter a big city, and it's going to be worse and worse. So cities have to be abandoned if you are a Christian and you want to maintain your Christian way of life. That is a must. Don't believe that you can stop what is happening, because it's already written, it's presented. It's just like, okay, we can maybe pause some of the problems that are ahead, but we will not be able to stop them completely, because it's impossible. So the idea is to get like-minded people, like I said in volume 7, and form micro communities in places in the US that are, of course, more safe than others regarding the way you can bring up your stock, you can have cultivation and whatnot, keeping in mind that in the risk of a nuclear escalation, we all end up like rats in the caves and in the bunkers. So hopefully that's not going to be the case for the whole of America. But we are in front of this decision, which is basically at one point or the other, some of our family members, some of our friends will say, well, I don't care, I'm just going to go to the Apple Store, I'm going to have this microchip because it gives me all these possibilities and I want to continue my life in this whatever. Okay, you were my mother, you were my this, you were my that, now you are no longer. Because that is the mark of the beast, and we will not be able to conduct ourselves in any way any longer. The first stage was experimented now in the pandemic, but the stage that follows up 2025 and the implementation of the microchipping on the world population, well, that is a dramatic decision with immense consequences, and there's no turning back from that point onwards. So it's up to us to create an alternative, and that's why the breakup of the union might also be a positive thing if we will still regain our traditional way of life, and they can continue with their BS, their hellish, infernal reality. That's their problem. It's no longer our problem, though. As long as they don't force us in joining them in reality, that's the thing. Until we see there is the possibility of avoiding and we can coexist, that's okay. But when they force us, well, then at that point we will simply say, okay, we part of this union, and we go our own way, you go your way. Hopefully we will not be entrenched in some civil war. That is the only thing that sadly might happen, but we hope not.
Let's hope not. Well, hopefully with all of your great work and informing people, more and more people will choose to opt out, and we can create more parallel.
The reject, yes, we create the reject rather than the great reset. We can
like that.
That is an option that I hope that the people will consider. So thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, thank you. Tell everybody where they can find you, buy your books, and see all your great work.
Yes, so you can find all my latest articles on leozagami.com. They are updated almost daily. We have articles that I write on leozagami.com. You have the links also to my latest books on leozagami.com. You can find, though, all my books from volume 1 all the way to volume 8 on Amazon, which at the moment at least is still keeping my books on their platform. So consider it like something that is not for granted for the future, that we will be able to distribute these books like this freely because censorship is increasing more and more. So, but at the moment, I would suggest that people to always purchase like we said right at the beginning, a hard copy rather than a Kindle. However, because these books are very big, the latest one, of course, it's something that you can't really bring around with you. Maybe when you can buy the Kindle just for, have an extra copy that you can read when you are around, but don't rely on it because one day they will just push a button and that's gonna go. So, but while instead the books, they're gonna have to burn them. We have to go to the good old days of book burning, but that's more easy to avoid. The good old days, because that is really when you see the system really fearing truth. It happened with the Nazis. It happened after the war with William Reich, even here in the United States.
Yep.
And it's when the system really fears you that you know that you are around to something good.
Right. That is true. That is true. And we are
bless you all, and God bless America. And thank you very much for having me on. And of course, in the future, we will be able maybe to get into other topics.
I would love it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for spending the time with me today and my audience and for everything you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.